If you're trying to break into cybersecurity, there's a good chance most of what you've learned is totally wrong. Not slightly off, but actually wrong. The kind of wrong that wastes months of your time, costs you money on things you don't need, and leaves you more confused than when you started. Most of the advice floating around online about getting into cyber was written for a completely different era. Chase these certifications, learn coding, start in help desk, grind your way to the top of the technical ladder. And people follow it because it sounds logical, but it doesn't reflect how companies actually hire, what GRC roles actually require, or what the fastest path to a six-figure cybersecurity career actually looks like in 2026. I'm Sid, a senior admin with over 6 years of experience actively working in the field. I've helped over a dozen people break into cybersecurity, and the first thing I have to do with almost every single one of them is get them to stop doing what they've been told. In this video, I'm going to walk you through everything you need to unlearn if you actually want to break into cybersecurity and land a GRC role. The beliefs that are slowing you down and the advice that doesn't apply anymore, and what you should focus on instead. So let's get into it. When most people hear cybersecurity, they immediately picture a guy in a dark hoodie furiously typing green code on a black screen. They think of hacking, penetration testing, writing scripts, or building firewalls. They assume that cybersecurity equals deep technical expertise, and if you don't have that, you don't belong. This is the single biggest misconception, keeping people out of the industry. Cybersecurity is not just one job, it's an entire ecosystem. And within that ecosystem, there are roles that are deeply technical, but there are also roles that are entirely business and process driven. GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. This area falls squarely into the second category. So let me explain what GRC actually is, because most people don't even know it exists until someone tells them. GRC is the function inside a company that makes sure the organization is managing its risk properly, following the rules it's supposed to follow, and has the right policies and controls in place to protect its data and operations. It's about understanding frameworks like NIST, ISO, SOC 2, PCI, DSS. It's about conducting risk assessments, managing vendor relationships, writing policies, and making sure the company can prove to auditors, regulators, and potential customers that it takes security seriously. None of that requires you to write a single line of code. None of that requires you to know how to configure a firewall or analyze malware. What it does require you to do is have the ability to understand business processes, communicate clearly, manage documentation, and be critically thinking about risk. And here's the part that most people miss. If you come from a corporate background, you already have a massive advantage over purely technical people. You probably already understand how businesses truly operate. You know how to sit in a meeting with stakeholders and translate complex topics into plain language. You know how to manage a project, follow a process, and create documentation that actually makes sense. Technical people often struggle with this because they've spent their careers talking to machines, not executives. In GRC, your ability to bridge the gap between technical security teams and business leadership is your superpower. That's not something you can learn from getting a certification. That's something you develop over years of working in a corporate environment. And if you have that, you're already ahead of the game. So the first thing you need to unlearn is that cybersecurity requires a technical background. It doesn't. GRC requires a business mindset, strong communication skills, and the ability to understand and manage risk. If you have those things, you're already qualified to start this journey. All right, this is probably the most stubborn myth in the entire industry, and it's one of the ones that ends up costing people the most time. You've probably heard it. Start a help desk, do your time, move to a security operations center, spend a couple of years monitoring alerts, and then maybe in 5 or 6 years, you'll earn a real cybersecurity title and then start making real money. Honestly, where did this advice even come from? Well, it made sense 10 years ago, and when the cybersecurity industry was a lot less mature and roles weren't nearly as specialized. Back then, there weren't dedicated GRC teams at most companies. Security was handled by a small group of generalists, and the only way in was through the IT pipeline. You literally had to prove you understood the technology before anyone would trust you with security. But the industry has evolved massively since then. Today, companies have dedicated GRC teams, dedicated compliance functions, and a dedicated third-party risk management program. These roles have their own hiring pipelines, their own job descriptions, and their own specific skill requirements. And I promise you, those requirements do not include must have spent years resetting passwords at a help desk role. Let me be completely real with you. The help desk to SOC to cybersecurity pipeline is the longest, hardest, and lowest paying route into a six-figure role in cybersecurity and GRC. Help desk jobs with overtime, yes, you could probably make 65, right? SOC analyst roles, maybe 65, 75, 80, right? You're spending those years in positions that will make you burn out and have fatigue, just to eventually qualify for a role that you could have targeted directly from day one. GRC lets you skip that technical ladder entirely. You don't need to spend 2 years resetting passwords to understand how to assess vendor risk. You don't need to monitor alerts at 3 a.m. to know how to map controls to a compliance framework. If you position your existing skills correctly, your project management experience, your communication skills, your understanding of business operations, you can bypass the IC trenches and step directly into a GRC analyst role. Now, I'm not saying technical knowledge is invaluable. It absolutely is. But there's a massive difference between understanding technology at a conceptual level, which you should definitely do, and spending years in technical roles just to check an imaginary box. GRC doesn't require that box. It requires understanding risk, and you could get that understanding without 7 years of grunt work. So stop letting people tell you you need to pay your dues. That was their path. It doesn't have to be yours. I see this all the time, and it drives me crazy. People are stacking certifications like their Pokemon cards. They just keep collecting them. They think that having an alphabet soup after their name on LinkedIn is going to guarantee them a job. It doesn't. What it actually does is give people false confidence and drain their bank accounts. Let me tell you what actually happens. Someone spends 6 months and $3,000 on 4 different certifications. They update their resume, they feel great about themselves, and they start applying. But they don't get any results. No callbacks, no interviews, no nothing. And they're sitting there confused because they did exactly what they were told to do. They got certs. But here's the reality. When a hiring manager reviews a GRC application, they're not counting your certifications. They're looking for evidence that you can actually understand the work. Do you know what an inherent risk score is? Do you know how to come up with it? Can you explain the difference between a SOC 2 Type 1 and a SOC 2 Type 2? Do you know how to write a corrective action plan? Can you walk them through exactly how you'd conduct a third-party risk assessment from initial intake all the way to remediation? Those are the questions that matter. And no multiple choice certification exam teaches you that. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that certifications are entirely useless. There are 1 or 2 that genuinely carry weight in GRC. But beyond those 2 targeted certifications, your time and money are so much better spent learning the actual frameworks, the actual terminology, and the actual workflows that GRC professionals use on a daily basis. Learning how the NIST CSF framework works, understanding what the SOC 2 trust service criteria is, knowing the difference between inherent and residual risk. That practical knowledge applied will get you hired so much faster than stacking certifications ever will. Remember, the certification industry is a business. They want you to keep buying exams. Don't fall for it. Be strategic. Get the 1 or 2 that matter and invest your time in learning the craft that will get you hired. This is the overthinking trap, and honestly, it catches more people than any other myth on the list. You've been studying for months, you've watched every YouTube video, you've read every Reddit thread. You've gone through an entire certification course, but you still don't feel ready. So what do? You keep studying. You build a home tab, you try to build a home lab, you buy another course on Udemy, you read another book, and you still don't apply because there's always one more thing you feel like you need to learn before you're good enough. This is a trap, and the longer you stay in it, the harder it becomes to get out. Let me tell you the minimum viable knowledge actually looks like to get a role in GRC. You need to understand the core frameworks, like the NIST Cybersecurity framework, ISO 27001, SOC 2. Notice I said understand, not memorize. You don't need to memorize every single control. You just need to understand what these frameworks are, why companies use them, and how they're generally structured. You need to understand how third-party risk management works, what a vendor risk assessment looks like, what a questionnaire might actually look like, and what happens when a vendor doesn't meet your security requirements. And you need to be able to communicate that effectively, both in writing and in conversation. That's it. That's the baseline. Everything else you'll learn on the job. Every single GRC professional I know, including myself, learned the vast majority of what they know after they were hired. The job teaches you the job, but you actually have to understand how to get the job first. And here's the part that really frustrates people who over-prepare. I've seen people with less technical knowledge but more confidence get hired over people who studied for a year. Why? Because GRC is fundamentally about problem solving and communication. If you can sit in an interview and confidently explain how you would approach a vendor risk assessment, if you can walk them through the intake process, how you'd score inherent risk, what you'd look for in a SOC 2, a hiring manager is going to trust you. They'll see someone who can think on their feet and communicate clearly. And that matters so much more than someone who's memorized every single control in a framework, but they freeze up the second they're asked a scenario-based question. Perfectionism is the enemy of progress here. You don't need to know everything. You just need to know enough to be dangerous. And then you can start applying. The learning doesn't stop when you get hired. It accelerates. But you'll never get to do the acceleration phase if you're stuck in an endless study loop. Set a deadline for yourself. Give yourself 60 to 90 days to learn the fundamentals and then start applying, especially if you don't feel ready. I hear this all the time. People think their background automatically disqualifies them from cybersecurity. I'm an accountant. I work in HR. I'm a project manager. I have a degree in English. I've been in operations my whole career. They look at job descriptions and they see words like vulnerability management, incident response, and they immediately close the tab. They just think, yeah, that's not for me. But here's what they don't realize. The backgrounds that actually translate best into GRC are exactly the ones they already have. Finance, legal, operations, administration, project management, and audit. These are the exact backgrounds that produce the best GRC analysts. Why? Because GRC is essentially project management mixed with legal, compliance, and risk assessments. If you've ever managed a compliance process in any industry, whether that's healthcare, finance, or manufacturing, you already understand the core concept. You're just applying it to information security instead of whatever regulatory framework you were working with before. Let me break down the real skills that GRC require. Communication. Can you write a clear, concise policy document? Can you explain a complex risk finding to a non-technical executive without confusing them? Documentation. Can you maintain organized records, track findings, and create audit-ready evidence? Stakeholder management. Can you work with legal, IT, procurement, and engineering teams simultaneously without losing your mind? These are the skills that separate a good analyst from a great one, and they're skills that career switchers from business backgrounds already have in abundance. Technical people often have to learn these soft skills completely from scratch. You already have them. You just need to learn the cybersecurity context so you can apply them. Career switchers often outperform people coming from pure tech because they already know how to operate in a corporate environment. They know how to navigate office politics, manage expectations, and deliver results without someone holding their hand. In GRC, that is worth way more than knowing how to configure a firewall. Stop telling yourself that your background is a weakness. It's actually your biggest strength. You just need to reframe it. Let's talk numbers, because eventually that's where it gets interesting. In most industries, entry level means entry level pay. You start at 40, 50K. GRC doesn't work like that. In 2026, the average entry level GRC analyst is making between 70 to 85. However, according to Glassdoor, the average GRC analyst salary is about 112K. And that's the average, not the ceiling, because there is a massive shortage of qualified GRC professionals. We're talking about a workforce gap of nearly 4.8 million people, according to the 2025 ISC2 Cybersecurity Workforce Study. Companies are paying an absolute premium for that talent. They literally can't find enough people who understand governance, risk, and compliance. So when they do find someone, they pay well to keep them. Once you master the systems and learn how to automate your workflows and build efficient processes, you can operate incredibly efficiently. And when you operate efficiently in a remote environment, your earning potential isn't necessarily limited to a single salary from a single employer. I'll leave it at that. But the point is, the money comes faster than you think. The ceiling is much higher than most people realize. You've probably seen the posts on LinkedIn and Reddit. I've applied to 500 jobs and haven't gotten a single interview. The market is brutal right now. Nobody's hiring. It makes the entire cybersecurity job market look impossibly competitive. And for certain roles it is. But here's the secret that most people don't understand. Most people are competing for the wrong roles. Everyone and their mother is applying to an entry-level SOC analyst position. Everyone wants to be a pen tester. These applicant pools are absolutely flooded. You've got thousands of people applying to the same exact role. But GRC is a completely different story. When you target GRC specifically, you put yourself in a much smaller, way less crowded pool. According to LinkedIn's cybersecurity job market data, GRC roles account for about 20% of all cybersecurity job postings. That's a huge share of the market, but the number of people actively targeting these roles are dramatically smaller than the number of people targeting SOC or engineering positions. This is your opportunity. While everyone else is fighting over the same overcrowded roles, you can position yourself for a part of the market where demand outpaces supply. That's an open door. This is the last one, but it might be the most important one. We've been taught the traditional career playbook. Get a job, work hard, wait for your annual review, get a 3% raise if you're lucky, maybe get promoted in 3 to 5 years, repeat until retirement. One job, one salary, one promotion at a time. That playbook was written for a world where you had to be physically present in an office, where your manager could see you sitting at your desk, and where your value was measured by the hours you worked rather than the outcomes you delivered. Remote GRC roles create a completely different opportunity because work is process-driven, documentation heavy, and largely asynchronous. It lends itself to efficiency in a way that most jobs can't. If you're organized, if you build good systems, if you learn how to automate repetitive tasks, you can complete your work in a fraction of the time it takes someone who's doing everything manually. And once you reach that level of efficiency, your career stops looking like a ladder and starts looking like a web. The people who figure this out early are the ones who will build real wealth in this industry, not by waiting around for promotions, but by understanding how the game actually works and playing it strategically. All right, that's everything you need to unlearn if you're serious about breaking into cybersecurity and building a real GRC career. 8 myths, 8 beliefs that are either outdated, misleading, or flat out wrong. And now you know the truth behind each one. The hardest part for most people isn't learning the right things, it's letting go of the wrong ones. It's accepting that the advice you've been following might be the very thing holding you back. That takes courage, but once you make that shift, the path gets a lot clearer and a lot faster. If this helped, make sure you subscribe. The channel is dedicated to giving you real, honest cybersecurity career guidance, cutting out everything that wastes your time and showing you exactly how to break into GRC, land remote roles, and eventually scale your income using systems and automations. Drop a comment below and tell me which myth surprised you the most, or which one you've been guilty of following. I read every single comment, so I'll see you guys in the next one.